kill and murder Madison Mogen, a human being?
Yes.
He shot him not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 5 times in the head, taking him away from his sons, taking him away from his family.
The money that he knew he was never going to get unless and until all 3 of his family members died.
Even in pleading guilty, he is giving nothing hinting of remorse or redemption.
Behind the friendly smiles and warm handshakes often lies a chilling truth. Some of the most shocking crimes were committed by those no one suspected. From Bryan Kohberger, a brilliant PhD student with a dark secret, to Michael White's violent attack that claimed the life of a police officer, these individuals didn't just take lives. They left lasting scars on entire communities. Let's begin.
Has anyone offered you a reward of any kind other than the plea agreement in order to get you to plead guilty today?
No.
Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?
Yes.
In the still cold hours before dawn on November 13th, 2022, a nightmare unfolded in the quiet town of Moscow, Idaho. Inside a seemingly ordinary off-campus house, 4 University of Idaho students were brutally killed while they slept. At first, nothing made sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no one had been restrained, and nothing had been stolen.
Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
2 roommates survived that night. One of them, Dylan Mortensen, recalled hearing strange noises and even saw a masked figure walk past her, but she was in shock and didn't call an emergency until the next day. When officers arrived, the scene was deeply unsettling. All 4 victims had suffered multiple injuries. It wasn't just a tragic loss, it was an alarming incident. As panic swept through the university, law enforcement launched one of its largest investigations in Idaho's history. The FBI, state police, and local officers worked around the clock. They found security camera footage of a white Hyundai Elantra circling the area several times around the time of the murders. Cell phone data showed that the driver had turned off his phone near the victim's house and turned it back on after the murders. Inside the home, investigators found a tan leather knife sheath next to one of the victims. On it, a single drop of DNA. That clue changed everything. The DNA didn't match anyone in criminal databases, so investigators turned to genealogy websites to track the family tree. That path led them straight to Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD criminology student from nearby Washington State University. When police finally caught up with him, he was at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. He was wearing surgical gloves and quietly separating trash into Ziploc bags. Authorities arrested him on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. Kohberger had no connection to the victims, but his phone data showed he had been near the victim's house multiple times before the murders, stalking them. Some believe he wanted to prove he could commit the perfect crime, using his academic knowledge of criminal behavior. But his planning failed because even the smallest mistake, like leaving behind a knife sheath, was enough to uncover the truth. After pleading not guilty for months, Kohberger shocked the court in July 2025.
$1,000 and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim.
To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms without eligibility for parole, plus 10 years for burglary and $270,000 in fines and restitution. Despite the gravity of his crimes, he showed no remorse.
You have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining.
I respectfully decline.
He also agreed to never appeal, meaning he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. 4 young lives full of dreams, friendships, and futures taken in the middle of the night. One of the victim's sisters said to him,
"The truth is, you're as dumb as they come. Stupid, clumsy, slow, sloppy."
And families and communities are still asking the one question that may never fully be answered. Our next case shows that sometimes the greatest threat isn't outside your home, it's sitting at your family table.
Was very brutal.
With what's referred to as a blue moon.
In Pensacola, a silent house held a dark secret. Richard Smith had vanished. When officers checked inside, they found his entire family murdered. The killer wasn't a stranger. It was someone they trusted, Donald Hartung, and it all happened just days before a rare blue moon lit the sky. On July 31st, 2015, police entered the home of 77-year-old Von Seal Smith and her sons, John and Richard Smith, only to discover all three brutally murdered. The bodies were found in different rooms, partially covered by blankets. John and Von Seal had been beaten and stabbed. Richard had a gunshot wound to the head. The horror wasn't just in the crime scene. It was the idea that someone had done this to an entire family, inside their own home. When police first arrived, they spoke with the one remaining family member, Donald Hartung, Von Seal's oldest son. He had permitted officers to enter the home, but what struck investigators was not what he said, but how he said it. It was like he had already rehearsed it in his mind. There were no tears, no regret, just silence. Detective Matt Infinger still remembers how Donald showed no emotion at all, not even a flicker of sadness, when told his entire family was dead. He was oddly calm, cold even. This behavior immediately raised red flags. When they searched Donald's home, things only got stranger. Investigators discovered a worship room filled with spiritual items and a Ouija board. Since the murders happened around the time of a blue moon, some wondered if this could have been a ritualistic killing, but experts later denied any direct connection to religious rituals.
The money that he knew he was never going to get unless and until all three of his family members died.
According to the prosecutor, the motive began to come into focus, and it had nothing to do with magic, only money. Von Seal Smith's will revealed she had left everything to her two younger sons, John and Richard, and purposely left Donald out. She noted that he already had sufficient assets, but Donald knew he'd never get the money unless all three of them were gone, and that's exactly what happened. The total money in their bank accounts was nearly $900,000. It was greed, cold and calculated. Donald Hartung wanted an inheritance that was never meant for him. So, he chose murder as his solution, taking the lives of his mother and brothers, the very people who trusted him most.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Donald Hartung, guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
The case went to trial years later, and the jury didn't need long to decide. Donald Hartung was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. However, he chose to remain silent while the verdict was read. The court sentenced him to 3 life sentences without the chance of parole. He now serves time at Graceville Correctional and Rehabilitation Facility in Florida.
As far as a motive?
They believe the motive is money, but don't know if Hartung knew he'd been cut out of the will.
Even after all this time, the relatives of the Smith family still remember the case vividly, not just for the brutality, but for the cold, calculated way Donald handled it all. The Blue Moon murders were not only a tragedy, they were a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't strangers, they're family. Our next case shows that evil doesn't always knock on your door. Sometimes, you walk right into its trap.
That will haunt you the rest of your life in your 4x8 cell. You're a worthless monster.
In the fall of 2011, people across Ohio were looking for work. Times were tough. So when a Craigslist job ad appeared offering free room and board in exchange for farm work, it seemed like a dream come true. But for 4 men, this ad wasn't an opportunity. It was a deadly trap. One by one, job seekers responded to the ad, hoping to start a new chapter in life. Instead, they walked straight into a nightmare. 3 of them would never return home. The man behind it all? A 53-year-old man named Richard Beasley. And helping him, shockingly, was a 16-year-old boy named Brogan Rafferty. The case began to unravel when one man lived to tell the tale. Scott Davis, a 49-year-old from South Carolina, arrived at the so-called farm for what he thought was a job interview. But as he walked ahead of Beasley, he heard the unmistakable click of a gun. In that split second, everything changed. Even after being shot in the arm, Davis fought back and escaped into the woods. His bravery would become the turning point, leading police straight to the killers.
Given the chance to make a final impression on the jury, the defense focused not on Beasley's brutal crimes, but the abuse he suffered decades ago.
As detectives dug deeper, the horror unraveled. Beasley and Rafferty had been using Craigslist to lure victims with a fake job ad, then robbing and killing them. 3 innocent men lost their lives. The 4th survived and became the voice for the voiceless in court. So why did they do it? Prosecutors said it was all for greed. Richard Beasley, deeply in debt and desperate, wanted easy money. The job ad was just a way to isolate victims in a remote location and steal from them. But things turned fatal.
The 53-year-old lured men down on their luck through a phony Craigslist job ad. The bogus ad promised work as a caretaker on a farm in Noble County.
In 2013, justice finally came. Beasley was found guilty of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and attempted murder. A jury recommended the death penalty, and the judge agreed. As the verdict was announced, Beasley sat in his wheelchair, still claiming he's innocent, and said, "I say here today officially for the record, I have killed nobody." His head was down. Though he claimed he was innocent, the court was convinced. His young accomplice, Brogan Rafferty, was sentenced to life without parole, too young for the death penalty, but old enough to face the consequences. In court, the families of the victims held back tears as the sentence was read. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about closure. These were fathers, brothers, and sons who simply wanted a job. Our next case shows how a first date turns into a real-life horror film.
Us to even be here, I'm going to have to ask. I wanted to go before my daughter because I need her to be protected by this heavy demonic energy that is residual in this courtroom, this devil.
On April 1st, 2024, Shade Robinson, a bright college student from Milwaukee, went out on a first date. She had met a man named Maxwell Anderson just a week earlier at a local bar. Shade was a student at Milwaukee Area Technical College, full of dreams and energy. Her friends and family had no idea this would be the last time they'd see her alive. The next morning, Shade didn't come home. Her phone was off and no one could reach her. As hours turned into days, her loved ones grew increasingly concerned. Then came troubling news. Part of her remains had been found near a local park. Investigators were called in, and what they uncovered next was deeply unsettling. Authorities soon identified the suspect, Maxwell Anderson, the same man Shade had recently gone on a date with. As the investigation continued, more of her remains were discovered in separate locations, including near a playground and along the shoreline in South Milwaukee. Some parts were never recovered. Maxwell Anderson had invited Shade to his apartment after their date. Surveillance video and cell phone data confirmed she never left. Investigators also discovered disturbing photos on his phone, images of him groping Shade while she lay face down on the couch, likely unconscious. It's believed that she was killed shortly after, then dismembered. Even more disturbing, Anderson then drove her car to an abandoned building, set it on fire, and took a bus home. He tried to cover his tracks, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, arson, and hiding a corpse.
I was a part of the search team, so we had the Wisconsin State Crime Lab coming to help with the search of the residence, as well as members from the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office.
During the investigation, horrifying details were shared in court. Anderson had dismembered Shade's body and left her remains in different places across Milwaukee. Prosecutors said the crime was carefully planned and showed no signs of mercy. Despite the evidence, Anderson claimed he was innocent and said a stranger must have taken Shade after she left his apartment, something no one believed. Prosecutors argued that Anderson killed Shade when she became vulnerable or tried to resist. His motives remained unclear, but his actions showed cruelty and a disturbing need to cover up what he had done. Anderson's lawyer asked the court to consider parole after 25 years, saying Anderson had served in the U.S. Navy and struggled with mental health issues, but the judge refused. On August 1, 2025, Maxwell Anderson was sentenced to life in prison without the eligibility of parole. He was also given more than 9 years for the other charges. However, while apologizing for his actions, he tried to prove himself innocent. "I didn't commit these crimes, and so I plan to appeal my convictions, while I hope and pray that further investigations not only prove my innocence, but find and deliver true justice."
When Maxwell Anderson murdered my sister, he redefined my definition of misfortune. No amount of financial hardships, disputes, or everyday struggles were even in the same realm as the effect of the loss he created.
In court, Shaday's parents gave emotional victim impact statements. Her mother said Anderson messed the entire community up. Her father said everything he did should be done to him. The courtroom was filled with anger, pain, and disbelief. The judge, Laura Crivello, called Anderson's crimes unconscionable and said the case felt like something from a horror story. She also said his view of reality differs from the rest of the world. Our next case reveals a man who took the life of a hero, all to run from the consequences of his own actions.
I understand that, bruh. But there ain't much more you can do to me, man.
In a small Virginia town, a young officer responded to what seemed like a routine call on a quiet November morning. But before the sun rose, tragedy struck without warning. On November 13th, 2021, just after dawn, Officer Michael Chandler was dispatched to conduct a welfare check at a home in Big Stone Gap, Virginia. It appeared to be a standard call, nothing out of the ordinary. But when Chandler arrived, he noticed something unusual. A car in the driveway was preparing to leave. Sensing something wasn't right, he radioed for backup. What he didn't realize was that inside the car sat Michael Donovan White, a man desperate to avoid capture. White told the woman to drive away quickly with him. There were illegal substances in the vehicle, and he was clear about one thing: he wasn't going back to jail. As Officer Chandler approached the vehicle, Michael White suddenly took off, but fate intervened. The car became stuck in the grass. He couldn't escape. Officers began to close in. Then, without warning, White pulled out a gun. From behind the driver's side window, he fired 8 shots. 2 bullets struck Officer Chandler. 1 hit his wrist, and the other landed just below his bulletproof vest. That morning, Chandler was rushed to the hospital. Despite every effort to save him, he passed away later that day from his injuries. He was only 29 years old.
We are asking for your prayers for this particular officer as he continues to receive medical treatment.
The search for Michael White intensified. Investigators soon linked him not only to Officer Chandler's death, but also to serious federal offenses. Authorities revealed he had been involved in illegal drug activity. Court records painted a grim picture. White wasn't just fleeing jail. He was running from a life of crime that was crumbling fast. Why did he harm a police officer? The answer is as tragic as it is troubling. White was afraid of going back to prison. He had illegal substances in his car and a criminal history. In a moment of panic, he made a terrible decision, thinking it was his only escape.
Those charges, it appeared that White was yawning and smiling. You can see part of that right here. White, who was appointed an attorney, requested a speedy trial.
On May 30th, 2024, justice finally caught up with him. Michael Donovan White pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 100 years in prison. But during sentencing, he showed no emotion. Instead, he yawned and smiled.
You, as a defendant, did commit aggravated murder. That is a Class 1 felony. It carries mandatory life in prison.
That wasn't all. On February 28, 2025, in federal court, he received an additional 100-year sentence for multiple drug-related offenses. The charges included conspiracy, illegal possession of a firearm, and operating a property used for unlawful activities. Today, White remains in custody, awaiting permanent placement in a federal prison, where he'll spend the rest of his life. Michael Chandler's wife, Natasha, an investigator with the Wise County Sheriff's Office, spoke through tears. While the sentencing doesn't bring Michael back, it offers closure. He died, protecting our community. Her words, filled with grief and strength, echoed across the courtroom. The loss of Officer Chandler can never be undone. But the community he served will never forget his courage, his kindness, and his sacrifice. Next up, a calculated setup that ended in horror. Joseph McAlpin lured his victims to their deaths, then tried to outsmart the justice system on his own.
If you was mad enough to go in there and rob and kill that family, why are you not man enough to tell everybody in this courtroom what you did?
In 2017, a quiet family-owned car dealership in Cleveland, Ohio became the scene of a chilling crime. Joseph McAlpin walked through its doors with one plan in mind: stealing cars. But what happened next was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined, leaving a family shattered and a community in shock. On a regular day at Mr. Carr's, the owners, Michael Kuznick and his wife, Trina Tomola Kuznick, were working hard to provide for their family. They had no idea that danger was about to walk through their door. McAlpin, along with 2 other men who waited nearby, came not just to take property, but to take lives. When the couple's son came to the dealership later that day, he was met with a heartbreaking scene. His parents were found dead inside the office with their pet. The police were called immediately. Detectives began piecing together what had happened. Surveillance footage and evidence pointed straight to McAlpin. Prosecutors said that after a serious incident involving the couple and their pet, McAlpin and his accomplices stole 2 cars and drove away, leaving behind devastation. As the case progressed, more details emerged. McAlpin had been the one to pull the trigger, while the other 2 waited down the street. The motive was simple. He wanted to steal vehicles. But in his attempt to take what wasn't his, he committed a brutal double killing. When the trial began, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Investigators learned that McAlpin planned the crime to get money and cars. Instead of walking away with quick cash, he left 2 people dead and destroyed a family's sense of safety forever. McAlpin was found guilty on all charges, including aggravated murder, aggravated robbery, burglary, kidnapping, and grand theft. He was sentenced to death.
Therefore, unanimously find that the sentence of death should be imposed on defendant Joseph McAlpin.
His execution was scheduled for May 19, 2026. However, recently, a court granted him a stay of execution, meaning the sentence will be delayed until all of his appeals and other legal processes are complete. As the family members of the defendant spoke, the defendant began to cry, realizing for the first time what it felt like for the victim's son to lose both parents in the place they had built together as a family. While justice was served in court, the pain of this loss will never fully go away. Our next case takes cruelty to another level. A killer who wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted.
Problem. I've been abducted. Who abducted you? Sean Train.
On September 16, 2016, police in Ashland, Ohio received a chilling emergency call from a woman who whispered that she was being held against her will. That call would uncover the horrifying crimes of Sean Great, a man later revealed to be a serial killer who had secretly terrorized northern Ohio for years. Sean Michael Great was born in 1976 and seemed, at first, like any other kid. He played sports, hung out with his neighbors, and came across as friendly to many. But behind closed doors, his family life was full of pain. His parents divorced when he was very young, and his mother left the family when he was just 11. These early wounds grew into deep anger and dark thoughts. As he grew older, Sean got in trouble with the law, including burglary and assault, but no one imagined the darkness that would follow. From 2006 to 2016, several women disappeared in Ohio. They were mothers, daughters, and friends. For years, their loved ones had no idea what happened to them. Everything changed that day in 2016. The brave woman who called an emergency had been tied up for 3 days, mistreated by Great inside an abandoned house. When police arrived, they rescued her and found the bodies of 2 other missing women hidden in the same house. The investigation grew quickly. Great confessed to killing 5 women. Authorities searched different counties, uncovering more victims, including a young mother named Dana Lowry, whose body had been unidentified for years. Great even led officers to more crime scenes himself. As detectives dug deeper, they learned that Sean had been living a double life. He pretended to be kind and helpful to gain trust, then turned violent. He strangled his victims and sometimes kept their bodies hidden near where he lived. In court documents, prosecutors described his actions as truly depraved and horrifying. During his trial, Great simply stated, "I apologized for my actions," and showed no remorse. In one shocking moment, he even claimed the victims were already gone in their minds because of hardships in their lives. The courtroom was filled with heartbreak as families heard the awful details of how their loved ones were treated. When asked why he committed these terrible acts, Great gave a strange explanation. He said he believed the government had taken over people's minds through assistance programs. He called it their bodies flopping wherever it can flop, showing he had created his twisted reasons to justify hurting innocent women.
No reason for anybody to know exactly who that man is because he's worthless.
In 2018, Sean Great was found guilty of killing Stacey Stanley and Elizabeth Griffith. He was sentenced to death for those crimes. However, he remained stone-faced, showing no regret for his actions. Later, he also pleaded guilty to the deaths of Rebecca Lacey, Candace Cunningham, and Dana Lowry. For these, he received multiple life sentences without any chance of parole. His appeals were denied, and the court decided there were no mistakes that could undo his death sentence. Though an execution date was set, ongoing legal processes delayed it further. Families of the victims expressed relief that he would never be free to harm anyone again. Police officers and prosecutors called it one of the most tragic and disturbing investigations they had ever faced. But amid so much darkness, there was also a moment of hope. The woman who bravely escaped and called for help saved her own life and uncovered the truth that had been hidden for so long. Her courage brought justice to families who had waited years for answers. Our next case is pure evil, a killer who hunted across state lines, leaving heartbreak wherever he went.
I was promised on the death penalty that in 7 years, the state of Florida would take care of this.
This is the chilling story of Glenn Edward Rogers, a man known as the cross-country killer. For nearly 3 decades, he drifted across America, blending in as a friendly stranger, while secretly leaving behind a trail of fear and heartbreak. From quiet towns to busy cities, no one knew when or where he would strike next, or who would fall victim to his deadly charm. Glenn's troubles began in early life. He left school before turning 16 and got married young. As the years went on, he faced allegations of mistreatment and became involved in crime. But it was in the 1990s when things turned truly alarming. Authorities started to connect him to the deaths of several women in different states. Women who trusted him, only to meet a tragic end. In 1995, a series of suspicious deaths brought Rogers to the attention of law enforcement nationwide. Investigators discovered he had been seen with women shortly before their lives were taken. One of the first clear links was to Sandra Gallagher in California. Sandra's life was cut short, and her vehicle was found burned near Rogers' apartment. From there, investigators tracked him across Mississippi, Florida, and Louisiana, where similar cases emerged. Police collected fingerprints, traced stolen property, and spoke with witnesses who had seen Rogers with the victims. When he was finally stopped in Kentucky after a long highway chase, he was driving a car that belonged to one of the women. His arrest made national headlines, and he was soon named on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. In court, Rogers faced trials in both Florida and California. The evidence against him included witness accounts, forensic proof, and patterns of behavior. He was convicted of killing in the deaths of Sandra Gallagher and Tina Marie Cribbs, and sentenced to death in each state. However, at the time of sentencing, he remained silent, even while in prison. Rogers filed many appeals, claiming mistakes had been made in his trial, but none of them changed the outcome.
He was convicted of murdering 2 women in Florida and California, but he was a suspect in several other murders.
While Rogers never offered a clear reason for his actions, prosecutors described him as someone who used charm to gain trust, then took advantage of the women he met. Some investigators believed he targeted people for financial gain or out of a desire for control. Rogers once even claimed he committed dozens of killings, though he later said he was only joking. After nearly 3 decades on death row, Glenn Rogers' final appeals were denied. In April 2025, the governor of Florida signed his death warrant. Rogers was executed by lethal injection on May 15, 2025. For numerous families who had lost someone dear, Rogers' execution offered a sense of comfort and finality. Some expressed that they could now find peace, knowing he would no longer pose a threat to anyone. Others believed that his passing was gentler than the suffering he had inflicted. Yet, after so many years of anticipation, the moment had finally come when they could begin to move forward. The next case shows that sometimes the most frightening conflicts occur within the very place that should feel the safest: home.
How did you feel at the time he touched you? I felt like I had to defend myself whether or not.
On December 20th, 2019, in Jacksonville, Florida, a day that started like any other ended in an unthinkable crime. Marcus Fishburne was staying with his roommate and the roommate's girlfriend, 25-year-old Aisha Levy. No one could imagine how this visit would end. That evening, Levy's boyfriend came home to a terrible scene. The apartment was covered in blood. The silence felt heavy and frightening. On the table, he found a note. Fishburne wrote that he and Levy were both dead and warned that the boyfriend would be next. The police were called right away. As they searched the home, they discovered Levy's body. She had been wrapped carefully and hidden inside a plastic storage bin, tucked away in a closet. It was clear that this was not an accident, but a planned act of cruelty. Detectives worked quickly to track Fishburne down. He was trying to run away on a Greyhound bus, but did not get far. Officers arrested him before he could leave the state. As investigators uncovered more about the case, troubling new details emerged. Fishburne had confronted Levy while she was getting out of the shower. He restrained her so she couldn't defend herself, then carried out a violent attack that tragically ended her life. Although Fishburne never clearly explained why he committed such a cruel act, the threats he left behind in his note showed anger and a desire to harm not only Levy, but also her boyfriend. The case went to court and the jury listened to all the evidence. 10 out of 12 jurors voted to recommend the death penalty. The judge agreed. Marcus Fishburne was officially sentenced to death on June 13, 2024 by a Duval County judge in Florida for killing Aisha Levy.
That the defendant be sentenced to death, and after assessing the proven aggravating factors and all of the mitigating circumstances.
However, he didn't show any guilt for his act. But this was not the end of his harmful actions. In 2022, while in prison, Fishburne attacked his cellmate by cutting his neck with a razor blade attached to a comb. He was given an additional 5 years in prison for that crime. Aisha's family will never be the same after losing her in such a tragic way. The courtroom was filled with sadness, anger, and relief that justice had finally been served. The case stands as a reminder of how quickly trust can be shattered and how important it is to speak up when someone shows sign of dangerous behavior. Our next case is about a drifter who used his charm to deceive, leaving sorrow and loss in every town he passed through.
Where the haystack in this sense is female DNA, and there might be some male DNA, the needles, but you may not be able to see them.
In November 2015, a terrible crime shook a quiet neighborhood in Youngstown, Ohio, leaving everyone in disbelief. A woman named Erica Huff, who used a wheelchair because of multiple sclerosis, lost her life in a brutal attack that shocked the entire community. On the morning of November 5th, Erica was home on Cleveland Street. Her mother was with her, and a visiting nurse came by. Later that day, the nurse left, and not long after, something unthinkable happened. Lance Hundley, a man who knew Erica, attacked her inside her own house. He beat her severely and also assaulted her mother. The conflict was so extreme that the home was set on fire while Erica and her mother were still inside. When emergency crews arrived, the house was in flames. Firefighters and officers rushed in and found Erica's mother unconscious from the beating. Erica herself had already passed away. Hundley was still inside the burning house and refused to come out. Officers pulled him to safety. Detectives began reconstructing the events and soon found traces of gasoline on Hundley's clothing. DNA evidence further linked him to the scene. Investigators concluded that Hundley had waited for the nurse to leave before carrying out the attack, a sign that the act had been carefully planned. In May 2018, after a long trial, a jury heard all the evidence. They listened to Erica's mother, who bravely testified about what she had experienced that day.
I'm on the couch. I couldn't see their face, and they was choking me out from behind.
Hundley tried to say that he had been attacked himself and claimed he woke up to see someone else in the home with a gas can. But the jury did not believe his story. They decided Hundley had planned and carried out this terrible act. Prosecutors argued that Hundley acted with prior calculation and design. The attack was not sudden or accidental. It was deliberate and intended to end Erica's life. Jurors recommended the death penalty. However, he remained emotionless. Judge Maureen Sweeney agreed and sentenced Hundley to death. The Ohio Supreme Court later reviewed the case and upheld the sentence, ruling that there was enough evidence to prove Hundley's guilt. This case left many people heartbroken. Erica Huff was a woman who faced health challenges every day, yet she lived her life with courage. The conflict she suffered was cruel and senseless. While her mother survived, she had to carry the memory of that day forever. The community still remembers Erica, and the ruling brought some measure of justice to her family. Wait to see our next case.
And nothing less.
What he did to my son before murdering him should be done to him. Eye for an eye.
Gut-wrench! In 2003, two young men, Jason Galehouse and Michael Wachholz, vanished from Tampa's vibrant community. Their families and friends hoped they would return safely, but those hopes were soon shattered when the truth about their fate was revealed. Jason and Michael were last seen alive in December 2003. Their sudden disappearance alarmed their loved ones, but no one could have imagined the horror they endured. Days later, Michael's body was found in his car in an apartment complex parking lot. Jason, however, was never found. Investigators later learned that he had been dismembered and his remains were discarded in dumpsters, making it impossible to recover his body. As police dug deeper into the case, they uncovered disturbing details. Stephen Lorenzo used dating apps and bars to meet his victims, often targeting those who were trusting and unsuspecting. Investigators found unsettling evidence on his computer, along with items in his home that raised serious concerns. Stephen Lorenzo and his accomplice, Scott Schweikert, had devised a scheme to manipulate and harm their victims. Their actions left a lasting impact on the lives of many and shocked the entire community.
After Mr. Galehouse was killed, his body was wrapped and put on a trailer in the driveway of Mr. Lorenzo's home.
Scott Schweikert, Lorenzo's accomplice, was a middle-aged man from Illinois who shared Lorenzo's sadistic interests. He later cooperated with investigators, providing detailed accounts of how the two planned and carried out their crimes, with Lorenzo taking the lead. Schweikert's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, as he described the horrifying events that had taken place. A survivor, Albert Perkins, testified about his harrowing experience with Lorenzo. He recounted waking up restrained and unable to call for help. Despite the fear he endured, Albert bravely took the stand to share his story, shedding light on Lorenzo's harmful actions. His testimony was instrumental in exposing the extent of Lorenzo's cruelty and bringing the truth to light. For nearly 20 years, the victims' families waited for justice. Then, in December 2022, Stephen Lorenzo finally admitted to his crimes. At his sentencing hearing, he shocked everyone by welcoming the death penalty.
I'm seeking the death penalty. It's in my best interest, basically, because it's a comfort. The sooner I can fetch myself a new body and come back again.
But the judge, Christopher Sabella, made it clear that his decision had nothing to do with Lorenzo's wishes. "This is the punishment you deserve for these horrific crimes," he declared. Jason Galehouse's mother, Pam Williams, who was battling terminal cancer, confronted Lorenzo in court with raw emotion. "I'm sick to my stomach just having to look at your disgusting face," she told him. Alongside her was Ruth Wachholz, Michael's mother, who had also waited 2 decades for this moment. On February 24, 2023, Stephen Lorenzo was sentenced to death. The courtroom was filled with emotions, relief, grief, and a sense of long overdue justice. Judge Sabella acknowledged the victims' families' pain, saying, "The thing that was consistent in their testimony is that they have been waiting 20 years for justice. Today, that long wait ends."
Ti condanno a morte. That translates to, I sentence you, Mr. Lorenzo, to death.
Though nothing can bring back Jason and Michael, their families can finally find some closure, knowing that the men responsible for their suffering will never harm another soul again. Lorenzo's case exposed a predator driven by cruelty. The next case shows that sometimes the most dangerous individuals aren't just killers. They're ideologues willing to take innocent lives for their own twisted beliefs.
After I found out he's getting the death penalty, I went outside and I hugged my friends and I started crying and I was just glad it was over.
On April 13, 2014, a quiet afternoon in Overland Park, Kansas turned into a scene of horror. Fraser Glenn Miller Jr., an 80-year-old man with a long history of controversial beliefs, tragically carried out an attack outside a Jewish community center and a nearby retirement home. His attack left 3 innocent people dead, none of whom were Jewish, despite his hateful intentions. Miller's path to violence started long before that day. Born in 1940, he once served as a U.S. Army veteran, but later in life, he became involved with divisive and controversial organizations. In the 1980s, he established a group called the White Patriot Party, which promoted exclusionary ideas and beliefs. He even sought public office to share his extreme viewpoints. He even ran for public office, hoping to spread his extreme beliefs. However, his activities eventually led to his arrest in 1987, when authorities found a stockpile of illegal weapons and explosives in his possession. He served time in prison, but never let go of his extremist views. By 2014, Miller was in poor health and believed he was dying. Instead of spending his last years peacefully, he planned a deadly attack. On that fateful April day, he drove to the Jewish Community Center and fired shots at people in the parking lot. He then moved to a nearby retirement home, continuing his rampage. His victims, William Corcoran and his 14-year-old grandson, Reet Underwood, were there for a singing competition. The third victim, Terry Lamano, was visiting her mother. They were Christians, not Jewish, proof that Miller's hatred was as senseless as his crime. After his arrest, Miller showed no guilt and appeared in court in a wheelchair. He shouted hateful slogans and even tried to justify his actions during his trial. The court found him guilty of capital murder and multiple other charges. A Kansas jury sentenced him to death, a punishment he openly accepted, claiming he was proud of what he did and said thank you. Miller remained on death row until May 3, 2021, when he died in prison at the age of 80. Officials stated that his death was due to natural causes. Though his life ended behind bars, the pain he caused to the victims' families remains. The story of Frazier Glenn Miller Jr. is a reminder of the dangers of hate and extremism. Innocent lives were lost because of one man's violent ideology. But in the end, justice prevailed, ensuring that his actions did not go unanswered. Our next case shows that sometimes the motive is even more chilling: senseless cruelty with no reason at all.
His internal life is going to be way worse than whatever he will deal with in this lifetime. I didn't attend any of the court hearings. I couldn't bear to watch what my grandson endured before he was shot.
On November 11th, 2022, 21-year-old Bryce Salter spent his evening at Y Bar and Bistro in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It was supposed to be just another night out, but when the evening came to an end, Bryce never made his way home. Hours passed and his family grew concerned. They didn't know that something terrible had happened outside the bar that night. Based on the information the press could gather, authorities were soon involved, and an investigation began into what had taken place. Bryce Salter was a young man full of life, known for his love of sports and fishing. He had a smile that could light up a room, according to his grandmother, Brenda Miles. But in just moments, his life was stolen by Lang, a man who had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison. Lang had been out of prison for only a few months when he managed to obtain a stolen gun. On that tragic night, he used it to take Bryce's life. The murder was brutal and completely unprovoked. He tragically shot and killed Salter. Surveillance footage revealed that Lang approached his car, where he encountered Salter. An argument ensued, during which Lang pointed a gun at Salter's chest, knocking him to the ground. Salter attempted to defend himself, but Lang fired multiple shots, resulting in Salter's death. Bryce's father, Brandon Salter, and other family members struggled to comprehend how someone could be so cruel. But what made the case even more disturbing was Lang's behavior during the trial.
Surveillance video shows the two men arguing when Lang took out a gun and knocked Salter to the ground. Salter fought back, but then Lang shot him.
Lang showed no shame for what he had done. During his sentencing hearing, he laughed as Bryce's family members delivered emotional victim impact statements. He mocked their pain, slumped in his chair, and smirked while Bryce's younger sister, Reese, spoke about how much her brother meant to her. Even after receiving his sentence, a minimum of 100 years in prison, Lang continued to smile. His attitude throughout the trial shocked not only Bryce's family but also the judge, who called Lang's actions senseless, cowardly, and merciless. Despite Lang's disturbing behavior, justice was served. The court handed him a sentence that ensured he would never walk free again. In addition to the 100-year sentence for second-degree murder, Lang received additional time for weapons charges. As the judge announced the verdict, the Salter family clapped with joy as Lang was sentenced.
70 years to a maximum of 100 years. Thank you.
As bailiffs dragged Lang out of the courtroom for his aggressive outbursts, one of Bryce's family members shouted, "How does it feel to know you're going to die in prison?" It was a powerful moment, one that brought a sense of closure to those who had suffered so much. Bryce's father, Brandon, called his son magic and said he had the perfect blend of everything: intelligence, kindness, and charm. His loss left a hole in their hearts that could never be filled. Bryce's sister Reese found the trial to be one of the hardest experiences of her life. Hearing the details of her brother's final moments was devastating, but seeing Lang mock their pain was even worse. In the end, the Salter family found some comfort in knowing that Lang would never harm another person again. While their pain will never fully fade, they could finally say that justice had been served for Bryce. Lang's lack of remorse was gut-wrenching, but what if a killer not only showed no regret but actively mocked the justice system? That's exactly what happened in our next case.
I didn't kill anyone. I'm not spending the rest of my life in prison for something I didn't do.
In 2007, the quiet town of Elyria, Ohio was shattered by a crime that no one saw coming. Dave Kowalczyk, the well-loved owner of Granny D's Pizza, was found murdered, a brutal and calculated act that sent shockwaves through the community. However, the true horror wasn't just in the crime itself, it was in the man behind it. Neil Simpson wasn't just a killer, he was cold, unrepentant, and dangerous. It started when Dave Kowalczyk's body was found in the pizza shop's back room, his hands tied behind his back. Police discovered security footage showing Simpson entering the shop that night. Investigators tracked Simpson to a nearby motel, where he was arrested within 48 hours. As the trial began, his chilling lack of remorse became clear. He didn't just deny his actions, he mocked the very system trying to bring him to justice. Spitting on jurors, hurling profanities, and showing no sign of regret, Simpson proved one thing: he wasn't sorry, and he never would be. From the beginning, the prosecution painted Simpson as a dangerous man. He had a history of trouble, a personality disorder, and a reputation for making reckless decisions. On the night of the murder, he was the leader of the group, the one in control. It was his plan, his decisions, and ultimately his actions that led to Kowalczyk's mourning death. The prosecution argued that the crime was deliberate, not impulsive. Simpson's past made him a threat to society, and they pushed for the death penalty. The defense, however, tried to shift the focus. They claimed his troubled childhood played a role in his actions. They argued that his upbringing shaped him into the man he became, and that should be considered in his sentencing. As the jury delivered their verdict, Simpson's face twisted with rage. Overcome with fury, he did the unthinkable. He spat at the jurors. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as officers swiftly escorted him out. His lawyers, scrambling to salvage the situation, pleaded for a mistrial, but the judge stood firm. 2 hours later, Simpson returned, his demeanor calmer, but his anger still simmering beneath the surface. He turned to the judge and offered an apology, but not to the jury. "I'm not mad at you," he admitted, his voice steady. "I'm mad at them." The courtroom was thick with tension as the jury left to deliberate. When Neil was seeking the death penalty for himself, hours passed, each minute stretching endlessly for Dave Kowalczyk's family. Would they choose the ultimate punishment? Would Neil Simpson be sent to death row for his brutal crime? After 4 agonizing hours, the jury returned. The room fell silent as Judge Mark Betleski prepared to read the verdict. Kowalczyk's family held their breath. Simpson, appearing through a grainy video feed from jail, sat motionless. His freshly shaven head and cold expression betrayed nothing. Then, the words came. Life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Due to election by the state of Ohio, on count 2, life in prison without the possibility of parole.
This was justice, but it would never bring Dave back. However, Simpson didn't flinch. No reaction, no shame. Just the same blank stare, as if he had already resigned himself to his fate. A life behind bars, with nothing but time to think about the choices that led him there. Though he avoided the death penalty, his defense attorney believed the outcome was worse for him. Life in prison meant no second chances, no hope for freedom. While a death sentence would have given him years of appeals, this verdict left him with only one. His fight for freedom was effectively over. The prosecution stood by the jury's decision, calling it fair and just. The case was closed, and the community could finally move forward. This case is heartbreaking in many ways. A hardworking man lost his life over a senseless crime, leaving his family and loved ones in grief. The trial itself was difficult to watch, especially given Simpson's lack of repentance. While the justice system ensured he would never harm another person again, no sentence could truly make up for the loss of Dave Kowalczyk. His family will carry that pain forever. Neil Simpson may have escaped death row, but he'll spend the rest of his days behind bars, alone, with nothing but time to think about what he's done. The next case reveals how a man who was supposed to save lives turned into a cold-blooded murderer.
Meditated if there are any number of cases in which a defendant was sentenced to death in Nebraska where the prior conduct did not rise to the level of disregard this defendant has for the value of the life of another human being.
Anthony Garcia was once a promising medical student, but his career took a dark turn. Instead of saving lives, he ended up taking them. Between 2008 and 2013, he committed 2 separate double murders in Omaha, Nebraska. His victims were connected to his past failures, and his crimes shocked the community. Garcia had a troubling history in the medical field. After earning his degree, he struggled through multiple residencies, often being forced out due to unprofessional behavior. His time at Creighton University Medical Center was particularly disastrous. His professors found him arrogant and irresponsible, and he was eventually dismissed. Dr. William Hunter and Dr. Roger Brumback, 2 senior figures at Creighton, played key roles in his termination. Years later, Garcia still held a grudge. Unable to build a successful medical career, he blamed those who had dismissed him. Then, in 2008, an unimaginable tragedy struck. On March 13, 2008, Dr. William Hunter returned home to find a horrifying scene. His 11-year-old son, Thomas Hunter, and the family's housekeeper, Shirley Sherman, had been brutally stabbed to death. The attack shook the community, but investigators struggled to find a suspect. Witnesses had seen a heavy-set man in a silver Honda near the home, but the case quickly went cold. For 5 years, the families had no answers. Then, in 2013, the killer struck again. On May 14, 2013, Dr. Roger and Mary Brumback were found murdered in their home. Roger had been shot multiple times and stabbed, while Mary had been stabbed to death. Once again, knives from the victim's kitchen had been used. Investigators immediately noticed the similarities to the 2008 murders. Their suspicions grew stronger when they discovered an attempted break-in at the home of Dr. Chanda Butra, another former Creighton professor who had classed with Garcia. It became clear that the killer was targeting former colleagues. Detectives began digging deeper into Garcia's background. They discovered that just before the Brumback's murders, he had purchased a firearm matching the type used in the crime. His credit card records placed him near the crime scene. and his phone had been used to search for the Brumbach address. On July 15, 2013, authorities arrested Garcia while he was driving in Illinois. He was heavily intoxicated, and inside his car, police found a handgun. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder.
Finally, in the fall of 2016, a trial. After 16 days of testimony, a jury found Garcia guilty of all 4 murders.
Garcia's trial began in October 2016. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including DNA, surveillance footage, and even a chilling confession to an acquaintance where he bragged about killing a young boy and an older woman. Garcia showed little emotion throughout the trial, often wearing headphones and appearing uninterested. After weeks of testimony, the jury found him guilty on all counts. In September 2018, a panel of judges sentenced him to death.
Asleep or catatonic. That's how the attorney for revenge killer Anthony Garcia, eyes closed, hands cuffed. He had no reaction, barely any movement during the testimony.
He remained silent and even slept when the judge announced his death penalty. His crimes had been calculated, brutal, and fueled by revenge. The case of Anthony Garcia is a chilling reminder of how bitterness and resentment can turn deadly. Instead of moving on from his failures, he chose to take innocent lives. His victims were people who had once been part of his world, yet he saw them as obstacles rather than human beings. For the families of Thomas Hunter, Shirley Sherman, Roger Brumbach, and Mary Brumbach, justice was served, but their pain remains. No sentence can bring back their loved ones, but at least the man responsible can never harm anyone again.
What he did is unspeakable. There's no way to take it back. There's no way to fix it.
Barbecue skewers, a duffel bag.
On April 12, 2006, in the quiet town of Purcell, Oklahoma, 10-year-old Jamie Rose Bolin was walking home from school. She lived in an apartment with her father, Curtis Bolin, who worked late hours. That day, Jamie never made it home. Instead, she was lured into the apartment of her neighbor, 26-year-old Kevin Ray Underwood, a man who had been hiding a dark and terrifying secret. Underwood had spent months preparing for something unimaginable. That afternoon, he saw Jamie alone and offered to let her play with his pet rat. Trusting him, she followed him inside. To make her feel comfortable, he turned on SpongeBob SquarePants. However, as she watched TV, he suddenly grabbed a wooden cutting board and struck her on the back of the head. He then suffocated her with his hands until she stopped breathing. Jamie's father grew worried when she didn't return home, and a search party was formed. For 2 days, police and volunteers looked everywhere. Then, on April 14, 2006, investigators knocked on Kevin Underwood's door. What came next revealed the depth of Underwood's depravity. At first, he acted normal, even allowing officers to search his apartment. He later admitted to police that he had long fantasized about torture and death. Underwood had hoped to assault Jamie's body, but when he couldn't, he attempted to decapitate her in the bathtub. When that failed, he wrapped her body in plastic sheeting, placed it inside a storage container, and hid it in his closet. To cover his tracks, he also concealed Jamie's bicycle, making it seem as though she had left the complex on her own. But when officers noticed a large plastic tub sealed with duct tape in his closet, Underwood's composure shattered. He suddenly confessed.
I recognize that I deserve to for what I did.
2 minutes. That's how long convicted killer Kevin Underwood spoke before the State Pardon and Parole Board.
Inside, authorities discovered various kitchen tools that he had planned to use for his disturbing and horrific intentions. Underwood later admitted that he had shocking plans involving Jamie's remains, revealing a deeply troubling mindset. His trial was swift. On February 29, 2008, a jury took just 23 minutes to find him guilty of first-degree murder. A week later, they recommended the death penalty, which was officially handed down on April 3, 2008. Underwood tried to appeal, arguing that his mental illness made him unfit for execution, but his pleas were rejected. Before his execution, his witness repeated his last words. "I'd like to apologize for the terrible things I did. I hate that. I did those things and I wish I could take them back." Finally, after years on death row, his execution date was set for December 19, 2024, his 45th birthday. On the morning of his execution, Underwood was served his last meal: chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, a cheeseburger, and a cola drink. As he lay on the execution table, he made his final statement. "The decision to execute me on my birthday and 6 days before Christmas was a needlessly cruel thing to do to my family, but I'm very sorry for what I did, and I wish I could take it back." At 10:14 a.m., Underwood was pronounced dead by lethal injection. Witnesses reported that he cried silently in his final moments. Jamie Rolls Bolin was an innocent child with a bright future. Her life was stolen by a man whose twisted desires turned into real-life horror. While Underwood's execution brought a sense of justice, it could never undo the pain Jamie's family endured.
You not only took her life, but you ended ours as well. You, Kevin Underwood, single-handedly changed our family forever.
The next case pulls us further into the mind of a killer, a young man whose thirst for violence didn't stop with just one victim.
The death penalty should be banned for those charged with crimes committed while they were under the age of 21.
On November 1st, 1997, in Greenville County, South Carolina, 19-year-old Freddie Eugene Owens and his friends set out with one goal: armed robbery. What should have been a quick crime for money turned into a brutal murder. Freddie Owens and his accomplice, 18-year-old Stephen Andra Golden, stormed into a convenience store late that night. Inside, they found 41-year-old Irene Granger Graves, a hardworking single mother of 3. She was just trying to get through her shift when her life was suddenly in danger. Owens, wearing a ski mask, demanded she open the store's safe. But when Irene couldn't do it, Owens didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger, shooting her in the head. He and Golden grabbed just $37.29 from the register and ran. Outside, their 2 other friends, Lester Young and Nikeo Vance, were waiting. Owens casually told them, "I shot her." It didn't take long for authorities to catch up. 10 days later, Owens and Golden were arrested and charged with murder. Golden took a plea deal, testifying against Owens in exchange for a lesser sentence: 28 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. Owens, however, denied everything. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed 2 masked men entering the store. The man in the ski mask, Owens, was seen pulling the trigger. On February 15, 1999, a jury found Owens guilty of murder, armed robbery, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. His sentencing was scheduled for 2 days later. But before he could even be sentenced, Owens committed another horrifying act. Less than 12 hours after his conviction, Owens, now awaiting sentencing in jail, killed another man, 28-year-old Christopher Bryan Lee. Lee had been jailed for a traffic offense, but that night he made a fatal mistake. He taunted Owens about his conviction, claiming his cousin was one of the jurors. Enraged, Owens attacked him in their shared cell. He attacked Lee, injuring him with a pen and a bedsheet. As if that wasn't enough, Owens then harmed him further with a lighter before blocking his airway with a pen. With 2 murders under his belt, the jury had no sympathy. On February 17, 1999, Owens was sentenced to death. But instead of pleading for mercy, he showed no remorse. Over the years, his case was repeatedly overturned on technical grounds, leading to multiple resentencing trials. But each time, the verdict remained the same: death. While on death row, Owens converted to Islam and took the name Khalil Divine Black Son Allah. He spent his time studying history, writing poetry, and even learning Arabic. After exhausting all appeals, Owens was finally scheduled for execution on September 20, 2024. Making him the first person executed in South Carolina in 13 years. Initially, he refused to choose his method of execution, saying that selecting a method would be a form of suicide, which his religion forbade. Eventually, his lawyer decided for him: lethal injection. For his final meal, Owens ordered 2 cheeseburgers, some French fries, a well-done ribeye steak, 6 chicken wings, 2 strawberry sodas, and a slice of apple pie. When the curtain to the death chamber opened, Owens was strapped to a gurney with his arms extended. He mouthed the word "bye" to his attorney before the lethal injection was administered. Approximately 1 minute after the injection, his eyes closed and he took several deep breaths. His breathing became shallower and his face twitched for about 4 to 5 minutes before all movement ceased. On the day of his execution, the family of Irene Graves and Christopher Lee gathered to witness justice being served. They had waited decades for this moment. At 6:17 p.m., Freddie Eugene Owens was pronounced dead. The murders of Irene Graves and Christopher Lee left families shattered. Irene's children lost their mother. Christopher's family never got to say goodbye. Our next case is even more horrifying. A man walked into a bank and murdered 5 women.
He just, for some reason, always hated people and wanted everybody to die. And he's been threatening this for so long. And he's been having dreams about it and everything.
On January 23, 2019, Sebring, Florida woke up to what seemed like just another ordinary day. The SunTrust Bank was open for business, with employees helping customers as usual. No one inside knew that their lives were about to change forever. Around noon, a man walked into the bank. His name was Zephan Zaver. a 21-year-old former prison guard trainee. He wasn't there to make a transaction. He was there to kill. Without warning, Xavier pulled out a gun and ordered everyone to the ground. 5 women inside, Cynthia Watson, Marisol Lopez, Anna Panan Williams, Deborah Cook, and Jessica Montague, had no time to react. Xavier made them kneel in a line before opening fire. There was no robbery, no demand for money, just cold-blooded murder. After the shooting, Xavier called 911 himself and calmly told the dispatcher, "I have shot 5 people." Xavier's background revealed troubling signs. As a teenager, he had violent thoughts and talked about harming others. In high school, he told classmates he had dreams about killing people. His school principal even contacted the police, but nothing was done. Later, Xavier joined the army, but he was discharged after 3 months. A former girlfriend, whom he met in a mental hospital, once said he believed the military was a way to kill people and get away with it. Despite these red flags, Florida police hired him as a prison guard trainee in 2018. He quit 2 months later, just 2 weeks before the shootings. Xavier was arrested at the scene and later pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. During the trial, his defense argued that his mental illness and troubled past should be considered, but the jury saw through it. In June 2024, a jury voted 9-3 in favor of the death penalty. Judge Angela Coden agreed. She called his actions calculated, heinous, cruel, and sentenced him to death. However, he remained stone-faced even after hearing his death penalty.
The defendant was previously adjudicated guilty of count 5 for the crime of the first-degree murder of Cynthia Watson. This court sentences the defendant to death.
Before sentencing him to death, she looked him in the eye and said, "May God have mercy on your soul." Zephan Xavier never denied his actions. He wanted to kill, and he did. Now he'll spend the rest of his days awaiting execution until the government sets a date, a fate that still feels too merciful for the horror he inflicted upon 5 innocent lives. The families of the victims were devastated. Marisol Lopez's son spoke in court saying, "You shattered me into a million pieces." Blackman, the family member of one of the families, had no sympathy for Xavier and stares at him angrily.
On the stand, Blackman continuing to stare at Xavier, visibly emotional, shaking his head until the judge stopped the trial, removed the jury, and reprimanded the witness.
The case shook Sebring, a small town of just 11,000 people. Many still struggle to understand how someone with such a disturbing history was allowed to walk free.
Yeah, he works, he has his car. I mean, he was just a functioning 21-year-old. I mean, to my knowledge, anytime I'd ever seen him, he's just quiet.
Our next case exposes how one fateful decision changed history forever.
He truly wants the finality of this tonight. They want closure, they want it over. This was a horrific event that affected not just the family, but our entire community.
On March 28, 1996, Donovan Corey Parks, a hardworking corrections officer, was just going about his day in Milledgeville, Georgia. He had no idea that a simple act of kindness would lead to his tragic death. That day, he ran into Robert Earl Butts Jr., a former coworker from Burger King, outside a Walmart. Butts asked Parks for a ride, and since they knew each other, Parks agreed. Butts got into the front seat, while his friend Marion Wilson Jr. sat in the back. Everything seemed normal as they drove away. Parks had no idea he was in danger. At some point during the ride, Butts and Wilson forced him to pull over. They ordered him out of the car, and as he lay on the ground, shot him in the back of the head with a sawed-off shotgun. His lifeless body was left face down on a residential street. Meanwhile, the 2 killers took his car and drove off. When they failed to find a buyer, they decided to burn it and destroy the evidence.
The Folk Nation gang, and we're talking to the prosecutors about that. This adds a more severe penalty to any offense.
For 4 days, investigators worked to track down the killers. When Butts and Wilson were finally arrested, they both blamed each other for pulling the trigger. However, authorities discovered that both men were members of the Folk Nation street gang. Prosecutors believed that the murder was a gang initiation, killing an innocent man just to gain status. Both Butts and Wilson were charged with murder. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and in 1997, Wilson was sentenced to death. However, he showed no emotion, neither for his actions nor for his sentence. A year later, Butts received the same sentence. For years, they fought to overturn their convictions, filing multiple appeals, including one to the U.S. Supreme Court. But each time, the courts rejected their claims, ruling that their trials had been fair.
The parolee board has issued a stay for an inmate who was scheduled to be executed today. Robert Earl Butts Jr. was scheduled to die tonight at the state prison in Jackson.
One of his family members said, He loves his family, and the death penalty is not the answer.
He is so very sorry, so please know that, and how much he loves his family, and this death penalty is no way to solve that.
Justice was finally served in 2018. On May 4th, at the time of his execution, Butts requested a hamburger with bacon and 2 kinds of cheese, a ribeye steak, chicken tenders, seasoned french fries, cheesecake, and strawberry lemonade to drink. Robert Earl Butts Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison. When asked for his final words, Butts said, "I've been drinking caffeine all day." It was a strange statement, making us wonder if he hoped the caffeine might counteract the effects of the lethal injection that would soon put him to sleep forever. As the procedure started, he muttered, "It burns, man." A year later, on June 20th, 2019, Marion Wilson Jr. was also executed. His execution made history. He became the 1,500th person to be put to death in the U.S. since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. At the time of his execution, Wilson is served with 1 medium thin crust pizza with all the toppings, 20 buffalo wings with spicy sauce, 1 pint of butter pecan ice cream, apple pie, and grape juice. After his meal, Wilson recorded a final statement at 5 p.m. He accepted a sedative at 6 p.m. Before the lethal injection was administered, Wilson was allowed to make a final statement. He declared, "I ain't never taken a life in my life." Addressing his loved ones, he said, "I love y'all forever. Death can't stop it. Can't nothing stop it." He also accepted a final prayer. Wilson was pronounced dead at 9:52 p.m. His daughter, born after his arrest, says, her dad is a kind-hearted and gentle person. He has always been a type of daddy who just wants the best for his family and his child.
My daddy, Marion Wilson, was a very kind-hearted, gentle person. He's always been the type of daddy who just wants the best for his family, his child, and the best for himself.
Park's family attended both executions, but they knew that no punishment could bring him back. His brother later shared the pain of their loss. Execution doesn't bring him back, but it offers a starting point for healing. In memory of his brother, he named his daughter Corey, ensuring that Donovan Corey Park's name would never be forgotten. Our next case takes us to a killer whose motivation wasn't loyalty or reputation. It was pure evil.
The statement that I had delivered to you already about my brother Donnie and the innocent men on Nebraska's death row.
On August 14, 2018, Nebraska carried out its first execution in over 2 decades. The man at the center of this case was Kerry Dean Moore, a convicted murderer who had spent nearly 40 years on death row. His execution would spark controversy, not just because of the crime he committed, but also due to the legal battle that unfolded over the substance used to end his life. It all started in the summer of 1979. Moore, a 21-year-old man from Omaha, Nebraska, made a choice that would alter his life forever. He robbed and murdered 2 cab drivers in cold blood. After the crimes, he was arrested and later confessed to the killings. The evidence was overwhelming, and in 1980, a panel of 3 judges sentenced him to death.
Saying he shot both cab drivers because he didn't want to be identified after he robbed them. And Moore said he kept the murder weapon because it gave him a feeling of power.
Moore's execution was delayed for nearly 4 decades due to legal appeals and Nebraska's changing stance on the death penalty. But in 2018, after years of legal battles, the state decided it was time to enforce the sentence. This marked the first time a new method had ever been used in a legal procedure of this kind. On the morning of August 14, 2018, Kerry Dean Moore was led to the execution chamber at the Nebraska State Penitentiary. In the hours leading up to his execution, Moore shared a meal with his family and friends, including his brother, David Moore. They were allowed to share Pizza Hut pizza, Pepsi, and strawberry cheesecake. This meal was shared with loved ones, including prison guards. Witnesses reported that Moore appeared composed yet shaken before the execution. He mouthed the words, "I love you," to his supporters before the lethal injection was administered. The first of 4 substances was administered at 10:24 a.m., and Moore was pronounced dead at 10:47 a.m. It was Nebraska's first execution since 1997, and the first in the state's history to be carried out using lethal injection.
The Lancaster County coroner produced Moore's time of death at 10:47 a.m. As the director of the Nebraska Department of Correctional Services, I am required to carry out the order of the court.
After the execution, Nebraska prison officials admitted they might never be able to obtain those substances again. Many pharmacies had refused to sell execution substances to prisons, making lethal injections harder to carry out in the future. People had mixed reactions. Some believed justice had been served, Moore had confessed to the crimes, and he had been sentenced according to the law. Others saw the execution as a violation of human rights, arguing that Nebraska had gone to extreme lengths to carry it out, despite the controversy. But the victim's mother was happy. She said that God had answered my prayers.
I really do. My prayers have been answered. And I prayed all along that they would catch him, and God answered my prayers.
Up next, Peter Avsonu, a cold-blooded killer whose crimes left a trail of devastation. His case exposed a shocking lack of remorse and a chilling willingness to take lives without hesitation.
Now on 7 News at 5:30, police working a double murder mystery after a family member expected home for the holidays never shows up.
We have 2 men who were murdered in this Wilton Manors home. Now, detectives won't tell us very much more than that. They won't say who they are or how they were murdered.
On a quiet December morning in 2010, a disturbing discovery sent shockwaves through the serene town of Wilton Manors, Florida. Inside a meticulously maintained home, the bodies of Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, a beloved couple, were found in what police described as an execution-style killing. The crime was as brutal as it was senseless, leaving a once vibrant community in fear. Behind this horrific act was Peter Avsonu, a man with a troubled past and a chilling lack of remorse. But the full story of what unfolded and how Avsonu reacted in the courtroom made this case one of the most disturbing the state had ever seen. Peter Avsonu was no stranger to the criminal justice system. His life had been marked by a series of arrests for fraud, theft, and adult services. By the time he crossed paths with Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, Avsonu had already developed a reputation as a dangerous drifter.
Their brother, Stephen Adams, and his partner, Kevin Powell, were found shot to death in their Wilton Manors home over Christmas 2010.
Adams and Powell, known for their kindness and generosity, had offered Avsonu a place to stay after meeting him online. But what began as an act of goodwill ended in betrayal. On December 23, 2010, Avsonu shot both men execution-style in their home, stealing their car, cash, and valuables before fleeing.
But we do know that the bodies were discovered here yesterday.
Investigators were horrified by the details of the crime scene. Evidence suggested the killings were calculated and cold-blooded, with no signs of a struggle. It was as if Avsonu had meticulously planned every step. Avsonu's escape was short-lived. Days after the murders, he was pulled over in South Florida, driving the victim's car. Inside, police found several of the couple's belongings, along with a journal detailing his thoughts, which prosecutors later used to show his twisted mindset. During his trial, the case against Avsonu was airtight. Ballistics linked the murder weapon to the crime scene, and surveillance footage placed him at the victim's home shortly before their deaths. The most damning evidence, however, came from his own words. Avsonu showed no remorse for the murders, claiming they were justified by his hatred for same-sex couples.
Read a short statement to the jury before they deliberated.
I have no regrets in my life and am proud of every decision I've ever made. Nobody here knows what really happened that day.
In 2018, after years of legal proceedings, Peter Avsonu was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. His trial became infamous not just for the horrific details of his crimes, but for his behavior in the courtroom.
Peter Avsonu was sentenced to death for murdering Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell. He made an obscene gesture at the family of Adams.
When the verdict was read, Avsonu's reaction shocked everyone. He smirked at the victims' families and raised his middle finger, a final act of defiance that underscored his complete lack of remorse. His actions left the courtroom stunned and further cemented his place as one of Florida's most despicable killers.
After what happened in that courtroom just now, I'm happy that he's put to the death penalty.
The families of Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell were left grappling with their grief and anger. The couple had been pillars of their community, loved for their generosity and compassion. To see Avsonu treat their deaths with such contempt during his trial was almost too much to bear. For the jurors and spectators, Avsonu's chilling reaction during sentencing was a stark reminder of his callous nature. Even in the face of death, he seemed to relish the chaos and pain he had caused. His smirk, combined with his unapologetic demeanor, made it clear that he had no regrets. The case also sparked conversations about hate crimes and the dangers of misplaced trust. Adams and Powell had opened their home to someone they believed needed help, only to become victims of his twisted agenda. Peter Avsonu's behavior was a cruel slap in the face to the grieving families of his victims. But the next case of Sean Finnegan takes an even darker turn of calculated cruelty.
Investigators discovering the body of Jennifer Paxton at a home on East Fairview Road. Now, documents say the victim was tortured and deprived of medical care.
In Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the murder of Jennifer Gail Paxton shocked the community to its core. Jennifer was a young woman with a bright future ahead of her, but her life was cut tragically short in a way that defied comprehension.
He's just, those eyes, I mean, just like a wild animal.
The man responsible was Sean Finnegan, a figure whose disturbing actions would paint him as one of the most cruel and callous killers in the state's history. But it wasn't just his crimes that left people horrified. It was his behavior in court that made him unforgettable.
In 2020, police in Oak Ridge, Tennessee investigate a tip that Sean Finnegan and his girlfriend Rebecca Dishman have a human body stored in their freezer.
Sean Finnegan's life was a pattern of manipulation and control, culminating in the events that would make him infamous. In December 2020, Finnegan lured Jennifer Paxton to his home under the guise of offering her a place to stay. She had been struggling with homelessness and believed this was a chance to rebuild her life. But once inside, Finnegan's demeanor shifted from kind to sinister. He held her captive for weeks, subjecting her to physical and emotional harm. Witnesses and investigators later pieced together a timeline that revealed a horrifying pattern of torture and dehumanization. The tragedy reached its peak when Finnegan decided Jennifer was no longer useful to him. He bound her with zip ties, brutally beat her, and ultimately strangled her to death. As if the murder wasn't heinous enough, Finnegan desecrated her body before storing it in a freezer, an act that underscored his complete lack of empathy. The discovery of Jennifer's body came weeks later when a tip led police to Finnegan's home. Inside, investigators were met with a gruesome scene, her body stuffed into a freezer, evidence of her brutal final moments etched into every corner of the room. Finnegan was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from forensic analysis to the testimonies of those who had seen Jennifer in the days before her disappearance. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution revealed chilling details of Finnegan's crimes. It wasn't just the brutality of the murder. It was the calculated and methodical way he carried it out. His lack of remorse was palpable, creating an atmosphere of unease in the courtroom.
You can see Finnegan fidgeting as the ME shows the mannequin. Now, several members of the jury looked away while the autopsy photos were being shown.
In August 2024, after a harrowing trial, Sean Finnegan was convicted of all charges and sentenced to death. The jury's decision was swift, reflecting the sheer horror of the evidence presented.
Upon the verdict, the jury find you, Sean Finnegan, to be guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. Upon further verdict of fixing the punishment of death, it is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by lethal injection.
But Finnegan's reaction to the verdict was what truly captured headlines. As the death sentence was read aloud, Finnegan's expression remained eerily blank, a chilling contrast to the emotional testimonies of Jennifer's family. His lack of reaction was described as unnerving, as though the gravity of his crimes and his punishment hadn't registered at all. Jennifer Paxton's family sat through the trial, their grief on full display as they listened to the gruesome details of her final moments. For them, justice was bittersweet. While the death sentence brought some closure, it could never replace the vibrant life that had been taken so senselessly.
Jennifer, and she just needs justice.
The courtroom was heavy with emotion during the sentencing, with jurors visibly shaken by the evidence they had reviewed. For those who knew Jennifer, Finnegan's stoic demeanor only added to the pain, a stark reminder of the inhumanity behind his actions. As news of the case spread, it sparked conversations about the vulnerability of those experiencing homelessness and the dangers they often face. Jennifer's story became a tragic symbol of how trust can be manipulated by those with the darkest intentions. Sean Finnegan's chilling lack of remorse revealed the depths of his cruelty. But the next case uncovers a predator who lurked in plain sight. Michael Gargiulo, the Hollywood Ripper.
The Hollywood Ripper. He's been called a serial sexual thrill killer.
To his neighbors, Michael Gargiulo seemed like the perfect gentleman, a friendly face with an easy smile. But behind his charming exterior lurked a predator so calculating and cold, his crimes would horrify the nation. Nicknamed the Hollywood Ripper, Gargiulo targeted young women in the Los Angeles area. His attacks were brutal, methodical, and deeply personal. But what made his story even more chilling was how long he evaded justice, hiding in plain sight as he claimed victim after victim.
Trisha Pacaccio was 18 when she was stabbed 12 times right outside her home after a night out with friends.
Gargiulo's reign of terror began in the early 1990s when his neighbor, Trisha Pacaccio, was found stabbed to death outside her home in Illinois. Authorities couldn't connect him to the crime at the time, and Gargiulo relocated to California, a move that would prove deadly for two more women. In 2001, Ashley Ellerin, a fashion student, was found murdered in her Hollywood Hills home. She had been stabbed 47 times in a ferocious attack that shocked even the most experienced detectives. What made this case infamous was that Ellerin had been scheduled to go on a date with actor Ashton Kutcher the same night she was killed. Kutcher, who arrived late to pick her up, testified that he saw what he thought were red wine stains through the window, a gruesome detail that later revealed the horror inside. The killings didn't stop there. In 2005, another young woman, Maria Bruno, was found murdered in her El Monte apartment. Like Ellerin, Bruno's death was brutal and ritualistic. Gargiulo meticulously planned his attacks, breaking into homes and catching his victims completely off guard. Gargiulo's obsession with control and violence made him a shadowy predator, operating under the radar while authorities struggled to piece together the pattern of his crimes. The break in the case came in 2008, when Gargiulo targeted his final victim, Michelle Murphy. Unlike his previous attacks, this time his prey fought back. Murphy, a young woman in her 20s, managed to fend off Gargiulo during a vicious assault in her Santa Monica apartment. She survived, becoming the first person to live through one of his attacks. Murphy's bravery not only saved her life, but also led to Gargiulo's downfall. Investigators found blood at the scene, linking Gargiulo to the crime through DNA evidence. That same DNA connected him to the murders of Ellerin and Bruno, as well as Piccaccio years earlier in Illinois. The pieces finally fell into place, and the Hollywood Ripper was taken into custody. Michael Gargiulo's trial captivated the nation, with Ashton Kutcher among the witnesses testifying against him. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man who stalked his victims, broke into their homes, and carried out his crimes with cold precision. In 2019, after a lengthy trial, Gargiulo was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. During the sentencing phase, the courtroom was tense as victims' families recounted the grief and anger. Gargiulo, however, remained stoic and emotionless, refusing to acknowledge the pain he had caused. His demeanor throughout the trial was unnerving, as though he felt no connection to the lives he had destroyed. The jury recommended the death penalty, and in 2021, Gargiulo was officially sentenced to death. His case remains infamous, not only for the gruesome details of his crimes, but also for his lack of remorse.
I haven't spoken about the impact that Ashley's murder has had on me. I know that losing her has adjusted my acceptance of my own mortality.
The families of Gargiulo's victims described the pain of facing him in court, knowing he showed no regret for his actions. Ashton Kutcher, speaking about his brief connection to Ashley Ellerin, recalled the guilt he felt for not realizing something was wrong that night. For Michelle Murphy, the only known survivor, the trial was a chance to confront the man who nearly killed her. Her testimony was powerful and emotional, a reminder of the lives Gargiulo could have claimed if not for her resilience.
To bring a child into this world and to experience that joy, all I can do is think about the parents.
The courtroom was filled with a mix of grief, anger, and relief when the death sentence was handed down. But for those who knew his victims, no punishment could truly erase the scars left by the Hollywood Ripper. Michael Gargiulo's lack of remorse left the courtroom stunned, but the next case reveals a killer who smiled through his death sentence, sending chills through everyone in the room.
This is the most horrific crime that I had ever seen.
The case that cannot be forgotten.
Oh, God.
Can only someone truly insane have committed these acts?
In the summer of 2014, what appeared to be the life of a successful software engineer in Lexington County, South Carolina, concealed an unspeakable darkness. Timothy Jones Jr., a father of 5, was living a double life. A man respected at work, but consumed by personal demons at home. What authorities would uncover about Jones's actions defied belief. His crime wasn't just horrifying in its brutality. It was the deliberate and calculated destruction of his own family.
Jones and the kid's mother, Amber Kaiser, had divorced after a rocky marriage. As part of their separation, Jones received custody.
Timothy Jones Jr. had been battling personal struggles for years. A devout but controlling man, he imposed harsh rules on his children and struggled to manage his temper. When his marriage to Amber Kaiser fell apart in 2012, custody of their 5 children was granted to Jones, a decision that would prove fatal.
I just PT'd his ass till he couldn't handle it.
And when you're saying PT, and what are we talking about?
Squats.
How long were you having him PT?
PT like an hour.
In August 2014, Jones became convinced that his 6-year-old son, Natan, had broken an electrical outlet in their home. Enraged, Jones forced the boy to perform grueling exercises as punishment, pushing him far beyond his physical limits. Natan collapsed and died. Panicked and spiraling, Jones made a chilling decision: to kill his remaining children to cover up the first murder. One by one, he strangled his 7-year-old daughter, 8-year-old son, and 2-year-old twin boys with his bare hands. He then loaded their lifeless bodies into his SUV and drove aimlessly across state lines for days, unsure of what to do next.
Tim, I'm not calling to argue or anything. I just, like, the past 2 or 3 phone calls, you've been, like, really on edge.
The sheer coldness of his actions and the methodical way he carried out the murders left investigators stunned when they pieced together the timeline.
Jones is stopped at a checkpoint in Mississippi, but there's no sign of the children.
Jones's attempt to flee was prevented when he was pulled over at a traffic stop in Mississippi. The officer, noting a foul odor emanating from his SUV, became suspicious and questioned Jones. After a brief search, the officer discovered the children's bodies in garbage bags in the vehicle's trunk. Jones was immediately arrested, and the horrific truth of what had happened to his children began to unravel. During his trial, prosecutors presented evidence of Jones's meticulous planning and lack of remorse. He had disposed of his children as if they were trash, driving across multiple states with their bodies in tow.
Who do you remember using the belt on? Were they older? Did they put up a fight?
I mean, what person's not?
The courtroom was riveted as the details of Jones's crimes were laid bare, painting the picture of a man who saw his children not as human beings, but as obstacles to his freedom. In June 2019, Timothy Jones Jr. was found guilty of 5 counts of murder. During the sentencing phase, the defense argued that Jones suffered from mental illness and emotional instability, hoping to spare him the death penalty.
And the murder of 5 children 11 years of age or younger. Now recommend to the court that the defendant, Timothy R. Jones Jr., be sentenced to death.
But the jury wasn't swayed. After hearing the graphic details of the murders and the devastating impact on the family, they unanimously sentenced Jones to death. The judge described Jones's actions as the ultimate betrayal, a father turning against the very children he was meant to protect. Jones sat stone-faced during the sentencing, showing no visible emotion as the decision was read. The courtroom during Timothy Jones Jr.'s trial was a mix of raw emotion and disbelief. Family members, including Amber Kaiser, the children's mother, expressed their grief and anger in heartbreaking testimonies. Kaiser sobbed as she described her love for her children and her regret for trusting Jones to care for them. For the jurors, the case left a lasting mark. Some later admitted they were haunted by the images of the children and the cold, methodical way Jones carried out their murders. Jones's lack of reaction during the sentencing only deepened the pain for those in the courtroom. It was as if he had emotionally disconnected from the weight of his crimes, leaving victims' families struggling to find closure. This case became a chilling reminder of how a person can appear composed on the surface while hiding unimaginable cruelty beneath. Timothy Jones Jr.'s lack of emotion during his trial showed the depths of his cruelty. But the next case takes us to Alfred Bourgeois, whose heartless crimes and chilling courtroom behavior left everyone speechless.
Home, a child killer who has spent 15 years on federal death row faces execution next month.
In December 2002, Alfred Bourgeois' actions shocked the quiet community of Corpus Christi, Texas. A long-haul truck driver with a volatile temper, Bourgeois was arrested for a crime so horrific that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. The victim? His 2-year-old daughter, who was entrusted to his care during a temporary custody arrangement. But instead of love and protection, she endured weeks of unimaginable harm at his hands, culminating in her tragic death. Alfred Bourgeois' life on the road often blurred the line between work and family. But beneath the surface, his temper and desire for control made him a dangerous figure, especially to those closest to him. In the weeks leading up to his daughter's death, Bourgeois subjected her to relentless physical and emotional torment. Witnesses later described seeing the child bruised, her tiny frame evidence of the systemic harm she endured. He would force her to sleep in the cab of his truck and withheld basic necessities as punishment for minor mistakes. The breaking point came during a routine stop at a naval base in Corpus Christi. Enraged after the toddler accidentally spilled her potty training seat in his truck, Bourgeois reacted with uncontrolled fury. He grabbed her and violently slammed her head into the dashboard, an act so brutal that it caused catastrophic injuries. When paramedics arrived, they found the child unresponsive. Despite their efforts, it was too late. Her small body bore the marks of a long history of harm, including fractures, scars, and internal injuries. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of what she had endured in her short life. The investigation into Bourgeois' crimes was swift and damning. Medical examiners confirmed that the fatal injuries could only have been caused by deliberate violence. Witness testimonies and forensic evidence left no room for doubt about who was responsible. During the trial, Bourgeois' attempts to defend himself fell flat. He claimed that death was accidental, but the prosecution tore his narrative apart, revealing his pattern of cruelty and neglect. Jurors listened in horror as the evidence mounted, showing that this was not a one-time incident, but the culmination of weeks of calculated harm. It didn't take long for the jury to deliver their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder and child abuse. The sentencing was equally decisive. Bourgeois was sentenced to death. Alfred Bourgeois' crimes left an indelible mark not just on his victim's family, but on everyone who followed the case. In December 2020, nearly 2 decades after his conviction, Bourgeois was executed by lethal injection at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. His final moments were as chilling as the crimes he committed. Witnesses described him as defiant to the end, maintaining his innocence and showing no signs of remorse. It was this cold indifference that haunted those in the room, a final reminder of the man who had so brutally betrayed the trust placed in him. The execution marked the 10th carried out by the federal government that year, part of a controversial wave of federal executions. For the family of the young victim, the execution brought a bittersweet sense of justice. It closed one chapter of their grief, but could never undo the damage Bourgeois had caused. The courtroom during Bourgeois' trial was a scene of heartbreak and anger. As prosecutors detailed the horrific harm, jurors and onlookers struggled to process the depths of his cruelty. Many found it hard to understand how someone could inflict such pain on their own child. Perhaps most unsettling was Bourgeois' demeanor throughout the trial. He sat stone-faced as medical examiners described the injuries his daughter suffered. His refusal to take responsibility, right up to his final breath, left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed the proceedings. For the paramedics and doctors who tried to save the young girl, the case was a grim reminder of the worst they could face in their line of work. For advocates against child mistreatment, it became a rallying cry to ensure such tragedies were never ignored. The actions of these brutal killers left scars that time can't heal, and their chilling courtroom reactions revealed the true horror behind their unimaginable crimes.